Hello and welcome to Life at PALS. This is part 7 of our GED Life Science question series. In the previous screencast we have stopped at question 64 and this is where we will pick it up. So the last question that we answered was question 63. The next one is 64. So let's get started. A dentist wants to prevent the possible spread of hepatitis C in her dental office. Which of the following steps is the least practical precaution she can take? Wear disposable plastic gloves, refuse to do dental work that causes gums to bleed, disinfect all dental instruments before each use, and place all blood-soaked items in a plastic bag for safe disposal. So, in this question, we're looking for the least practical precaution. Important here is practical precaution. Now, since we are talking about a dentist, the work of a dentist often does involve bleeding gums. So it's not really a practical approach to refuse any work that may cause gums to bleed. This is something very normal in dental work. However, all other precautions make sense. They help to prevent the spread of hepatitis C. So therefore, B is the correct answer. The following diagram is known as the energy pyramid or an energy pyramid diagram. It represents the graphical model of flow of energy in a community, food chain or food web, and each level in the energy pyramid is known as a trophic level, a feeding level, and approximately 10% of the energy passes from one trophic level to the next. So which of the following information is not represented in the pyramid? The number of organisms decreases as you move up the pyramid. The energy flow in the ecosystem starts from the producers. Now, this is definitely shown since the producers have the most energy, therefore it starts down here. If there is a sudden increase in the population of primary consumers, then that block will become the lowest in the pyramid. Energy flows from the bottom to the top of the pyramid. So which of the following information is not represented in the pyramid? This one's a bit tricky. Now, if there's a sudden increase in the population of primary consumers, then that block will become the lowest in the pyramid. I think this does not make sense at all here, so that should be the correct answer. Now, since the energy pyramid shows the flow of energy, even if there are more primary consumers than producers, the primary consumers will still feed on the producers and the energy will still flow from the producers to the primary consumers and not the other way around. Therefore, the primary consumers will remain in this position here and not change position with the producers. Suppose that the producers had 18,000 units of energy. Approximately how much energy would reach the level of the tertiary consumer? Again, we have always a 10% transfer of energy. Approximately 10% of the energy passes from one trophic level to another. So that means we can do this step by step. So reducing 18,000 to 10%. So we just divide it by 10 basically. That makes it 1,800, and then 10% of that is 180, and 10% of that is 18. So the correct answer is D, 18 units. Which of the following is a significant factor of the energy transfer depicted by the energy pyramid? The energy pyramid is applicable to animals only. I don't think this is correct because there are producers in here, and producers are usually plants. There's a large difference in the number of organisms in the lowest and highest trophic level. The energy pyramid does not include all living organisms in the ecosystem. Now, all organisms usually are part of some kind of feeding level. Yes, let's see. The energy pyramid holds true only during the daytime, so that doesn't make sense. Huh? So that is, yeah, for any time. Even during nighttime, producers will hold energy, saved energy. They will produce more energy during the daytime. So it's either B or C, which of the following is a significant factor of the energy transfer that is depicted. There is a large difference in the number of organisms in the lowest and in the highest trophic level, so that should be the correct answer. Don't really like the number of organisms here. So number of organisms is always problematic because it's more about the biomass, the total mass of organisms on each level, because organisms can have very varying size and mass and therefore stored amount of energy in their body. So if we think about the producer level, if we're talking about huge big trees here, and then, yeah, some kind of consumer level, maybe very small insects, then obviously a single tree holds a lot more energy than a small insect. So, yeah, talking about numbers of organisms is always problematic, but usually that is correct. No? So the tertiary consumer level usually has very few organisms, small population size, whereas the producer level usually has a large population size, just because of the amount of energy that's available on the trophic level. So B should be the correct answer. So that brings us to question 68 and 69. We're still in the same topic of ecosystems, food webs and food chains, and energy transfer. A food chain is a sequence of energy transfer from one group of organisms to another in an ecosystem, and several interconnected and overlapping food chains from a food web. A typical food chain consists of the following: a producer, which is the base of the food chain, formed by autotrophic primary producer organisms. Autotrophic means self-feeding, being able to produce their own food, and that's why they're called producers. They produce their own food, usually through the process of photosynthesis. Primary consumers, these organisms do not produce their own food, but depend on the primary consumers as their food source, so they feed on the producers. Secondary consumers, these animals depend on other animals, mainly herbivores, for food, so they feed on the primary consumers, and the tertiary consumers are animals that take their food either directly or indirectly from all other trophic levels. Carrion eaters, such as vultures and burying beetles, are, so just using our definitions, and carrion is basically dead meat or dead animals, decaying animals. Vultures feed on dead animals, so are burying beetles. And just looking at our definitions here, producers doesn't make sense. No, they are definitely not making their own food, they're plants. Secondary consumers, these are animals that depend on other animals. That far it makes sense. Mainly herbivores for food. That does not really match. No, any dead animal can be, any animal can die and become carrion. So therefore, it's probably a tertiary consumer because these animals take their food either directly or indirectly from all other trophic levels. That makes sense. Now, any kind of dead animal can come from any kind of trophic level, and therefore that statement down here makes sense, and the vultures should be tertiary consumers. Grass is a producer. Don't need to talk about this in much detail, I guess. The plant can do photosynthesis, therefore makes its own food, and is a producer. 70 to 72 refer to the following passage. A controversial health issue today is the use of irradiation to preserve food. So we're talking about irradiation to preserve food. In this process, high-energy gamma rays obtained from the radioactive decay of cobalt or high-energy X-rays are used to kill mold, insects, parasites, and bacteria. So high-energy gamma rays, X-rays are used to kill bacteria and other things in food to preserve it. Food irradiation has been used in dozens of countries, but it has only slowly come into use in the United States. The US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, first approved irradiation for harvested wheat and potatoes in the early 1960s. No other foods were approved until 1980s when spices, pork, fruits, and vegetables were added to the list. More recently, beef was added to the approved list in 1997. Many other foods are expected to be approved for irradiation in the coming years. Although gamma rays are from a form of nuclear radiation, irradiated food is not radioactive. So that is an important piece of information here. Gamma rays are a form of radiation, but irradiated food is not or does not become radioactive. It can be eaten immediately, or it can be vacuum packed and stored safely for several years. Supporters claim that irradiation is a safe alternative to pesticides and more traditional preservatives. However, critics point out that because irradiation can be used only on harvested crops, pesticides will still be needed to protect crops in the fields. What's more, they say that irradiation may kill odor-producing organisms that signal spoilage without killing the source of food poisoning. So that is probably something important here as well. Critics say that irradiation may kill odor-producing organisms that signal spoilage of the food without killing the source of the food poisoning. Thus, irradiation may destroy an important natural warning system. Some critics also have claimed that irradiation may change the chemical makeup of food and create carcinogens in the food. Supporters, on the other hand, contended that an equal amount of carcinogens is produced when food is cooked or frozen. So, equal amounts of carcinogens are produced when food is cooked or frozen, same as irradiation creates carcinogens. Both supporters and critics agree that with regard to the handling of the food irradiated or not, both strict sanitation and cooking standards are essential if public health is to be safeguarded. Which of the following is the best summary of the passage? Food irradiation is an accepted method of food preservation the world over. Maybe, but I think because it's mentioned that it's worldwide done, but this article mainly focuses on the US. I think Although controversial, the use of food irradiation is increasing in the United States. That sounds okay. Food irradiation does not result in deadly radioactive waste. That doesn't make sense at all. Food irradiation can bring down the costs of dried fruit. That doesn't make sense either. So it's either A or B. And the one that makes most sense here is, I would say, B, because so the article is mainly about the US and the discussion about food irradiation and how it slowly has increased over the years. The word itself is not so much of talking not that much about it. So 71, when fruit is irradiated for a very long time, it turns squishy. What is one possible effect on fruit of long-term exposure to gamma rays? The breakdown of the fruit's chromosomes, the breakdown of the fruit's cell walls, change in the fruit's color, destruction of the fruit's cellular nuclei. So we get a very important piece of information here. So when it's irradiated for a long time, it turns squishy, which means its stability is somehow affected. And fruits are plants, and what do we know plant cells have that provide them with stability? That is their cell wall. So it's very likely that the irradiation somehow affects the cell wall and breaks it down, and therefore this food goes squishy. Or everything else does not relate to what information we get here. Which of the following facts is least important to FDA food scientists who are trying to determine what, if any, are the long-term dangers of food irradiation? Least important facts to determine long-term dangers. So far, no adverse reactions to irradiation have been observed. That is an important piece of information, so we are looking for the least important. Cancer associated with food irradiation may take 20 or more years to develop. That is probably an important fact as well, because that means long-term studies have to be done, and people have to be observed for a long time. The exact chemical changes caused by gamma radiation are impossible to determine, because the well-publicized dangers of radioactive waste, many people fear the food irradiation process. Now all of these seem quite important. The first three, so the second one just means that long-term studies have to be done if it may take a long time for cancer to develop. And it's as well important to understand that the exact chemical changes caused by the gamma radiation are impossible to determine. That has to be taken into account when the dangers are evaluated. Now, what's not really of interest what the long-term dangers of food irradiation are, because of well-publicized dangers of radioactive waste. Many people fear the food irradiation process. Now, radioactive waste has nothing to do with food irradiation. We get a lot of information here. Now, this is actually the important statement here that we have to take from the text. Although gamma rays are a form of nuclear radiation, irradiated food is not radioactive. So the irradiated food has nothing to do with radioactive waste. It's not radioactive. Therefore, this fear in the population is nothing important to study the long-term effects of irradiated food. So, the following table shows the risk factors of various birth control methods when instructions are carefully followed. All methods are even less effective when not used properly. So you have a list of birth control methods here, and their risk factor, which is the approximate percentage of women who become pregnant each year while using this method. And important is that this percentage is following the instructions carefully. So the higher the risk factor, the more women become pregnant, although they didn't want to become pregnant because they were obviously using a birth control method. So that's the important takeaway message here. So of the following birth control methods listed in the table, which is the most effective? So we're looking for the lowest percentage, and we can see here almost 0% is sterilization, tubal ligation or vasectomy, which is basically not being able to reproduce anymore, and therefore it is almost 0%. So of the following, that means D is the correct answer, and almost 0% means most effective. In which of the following publications or advertisements would you be least likely to find this table? So in an advertisement or a publication, where would we not find this table? An advertisement for female condoms, community health clinic brochure, a book on different forms of birth control, and an advertisement for birth control pills. So B and C are generally for general information about birth control probably, and that would be very helpful to include this table in there. So it's very likely to find this table in these two. The other two are advertisements, so that means promoting a certain product, and then we can compare the female condom to the birth control pills and their risk factor. Birth control pill has 6% risk factor, whereas female condoms have a 21% risk factor, so therefore we can exclude D. 6% is one of the lowest in the table, so using that table to advertise birth control pills makes sense. Not only an IUD or sterilization or abstinence is more effective, and from that, the birth control pill is probably the most easiest and therefore one of the safest and most common methods. 21% is one of the highest risk factors in here, so therefore it does make sense to use this table to advertise female condoms. Saccharin is a chemical substance that is about 500 times sweeter than ordinary sugar. Saccharin is used as a sugar substitute in many foods and beverages. In 1978, following the discovery of saccharin in 1978, following the discovery that saccharin increases the incidences of bladder cancer in rats, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration began requiring that all products containing saccharin carry a warning label. Which comparative study described below would provide evidence that saccharin increases the risk of bladder cancer in humans? So what kind of study would we have to do to test whether it increases the risk of bladder cancer in humans? A study of the exercise habits of a group of people who are bladder cancer patients. That's not at all related to saccharin. A study of the long-term health of a group of healthy people who do not eat saccharin. A study of the long-term health of a group of healthy people who eat saccharin regularly. That makes probably most sense. Long-term study of people who eat saccharin regularly and see if they develop a higher rate of bladder cancer than our regular population. And our last three questions for this screencast are about symbiosis. And symbiosis is used when two species live and associate closely together and depend on each other in some kind of way. There are three symbiotic relationships, which are commensalism, parasitism, and mutualism. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship in which one species benefits from the relationship while the other is not affected. Parasitism is one where one species benefits from the relationship and the other is harmed. And mutualism, there both species benefit from the relationship. So we have three examples and we have to classify them as one of these three forms of symbiosis. Tapeworms attach themselves to the intestines of animals such as cows and pigs and feed on the partly digested food from the host's intestine, thereby depriving the host of nutrients. This relation is classified as, so as we can see, the tapeworm obviously benefits since it gets food from its host, and the host is harmed to some extent because it is deprived of nutrients, so it's losing nutrients. Therefore, this is an example of parasitism. The remora fish forms a symbiotic relationship with sharks. The remora has special suckers attached to its fins that help it attach itself to the bodies of sharks. It uses the shark for transportation as well as protection from predators. It also eats up the scraps of food that are left over when the shark eats its prey. This relationship can be classified as, so the remora fish obviously benefits from this relationship in many ways. It uses the shark for transportation, so it gets around faster, has to use less of its own energy. It is protected, sticking to the shark, since his predators will not come close to the shark, since the shark may be a predator of the remora's predators, and therefore they are safer. And it gets some food, the scraps, the leftovers from the shark food, the shark eating. The shark itself is, but we don't get any information how the shark is affected, so we can assume that the shark does not have any effect from the remora sticking on its side and attaching to it. So the shark has no effect of this relationship, therefore it should be commensalism. The honeybee sucks nectars from flowers, and in the process, pollen grains from the flower stick to the body of the bee. When the bee goes to suck nectar from another flower, the grains get transferred to that flower, thereby helping in the reproduction of flower-bearing plants. This relationship can be classified as mutualism. Both benefit, the bees get their food, whereas the flowers are helped in their reproduction. So that's it for today. I hope I could help you in your preparation for your GED science exam. I hope you've learned something new today, and I will see you in the next screencast. Good luck and have a nice day.